Hi, my name is David Taylor, and for more than 40 years, SAP has been helping companies to be able to run better. For the next 40 minutes or so, what I would like to do is walk you through your landscape and the roadmap of innovation that you can leverage on your time frame to not only help you be able to run better, but to allow you to be able to reduce the complexity within your IT landscape. So if we start off with the very basics here, what you have is you have your ERP system running your transactional system. And so there's a lot of data, a lot of processes that, again, you have standardized and that you have built to help your organization run better. At the same time as well, you've actually made modifications to that environment. You've created what we call kind of Z processes or Z content that you have customized specifically for your organization. Now, what happened was SAP, when they first developed ERP, provided embedded reporting directly within your ERP environment. So if you wanted to run reports, we actually had pre-built report content that you could leverage. And then right here, right, you could run your reports directly to the end user. The problem that you have is that if you start running too many reports within your ERP environment, or you try to run a report over a very long period of time because you want to see what's happening, right? Then the problem is what happens to your ERP environment, or what happens to your users that are trying to run transactions, right? They slow down, right? They slow down, they get frustrated because the system isn't running quickly enough, right? So, and typically when you're looking at ERP, you're wanting to look at, how is my organization organized today, right? Not necessarily how was it organized last year. So what organizations began to do is they began to build their own enterprise data warehouses, right? So that they could offload all of the reporting and all of the strategic analysis that they wanted to do from their transactional systems into an enterprise data warehouse. And so SAP innovated with a technology called BW, which was really an enterprise data warehousing platform, or what I like to call enterprise data warehouse in a box. The thing I liked about that BW was the fact that we had the extractors already pre-built, so we could extract all the information, all of the critical metadata, all that key information out of your ERP environment into BW. It also ran on the same traditional relational database technology because that's all we really had at the time. And the nice thing about the enterprise data warehouse in the box is the fact that it did all of the tough things for us. It took care of our multi-currency type of situations. It allowed us to look at things like slowly changing dimensions, or what people call a historical view of data. It also allowed us to have a trusted platform, right, where I had predefined roles. And I had all kinds of security defined within the environment. And of course, because security is extremely important, right, that made my CFO extremely important. And of course, then I also was able to track all of my key master data, for example. So what happened was we provided these extractors. We would extract information from ERP into BW. We then put that into a data structure called a DSO. And then what the IT organization could do is they could begin to model that data together, right? Or they could use the pre-built models that SAP had, and they would be able to then model that data in such a way that users could then create queries on top of that data. Okay? And then SAP also delivered some report writing solutions, things like BEX Analyzer, right, which users could use to pull data into Excel. They had BEX Web, and they had BEX Web Application Designer for creating web-based applications. And these were great solutions. The only problem was that sometimes organizations were so large, or the data volume changes within BW were so significant that suddenly we had to begin reacting, and we had to begin copying data and creating more types of models, right? And as if we had a very large view of data that we needed to be able to provide to our end users, suddenly we found ourselves doing kind of unusual things to try to break that cube down into individual components, right? Or creating things like multi-providers as a way of trying to to spread the processing out so that we could keep up with what end users needed. Or we would take a set of data and we would maybe reduce it so that instead of having all the detailed data associated with that information, we would actually just have the summary data, because we knew that these summarized cubes, right, would have consistently good performance. So those are some things that we did in order to combat performance. But then what that ended up doing as well was it ended up increasing our complexity over time. Okay, and it also ended up reducing our agility, because now we had copies and copies of data. So if we ever needed to make a change, there might be one change within our BW environment that would require us to rebuild multiple cubes over time. Not to mention the fact that I also had to maintain all of my database statistics around this traditional relational database platform here to make sure it was performant based on what I was doing within BW. So BWA allowed organizations to decide to accelerate certain BEX queries so that they could get better performance. The challenge with BWA was that it was good at being able to pull back the data quickly, but it still was dependent on the OLAP processor, which was part of BW. And so even though it might return the results from the query quicker, there were still some situations where I had a lot of restricted or calculated key figures, which could still have queries take a certain length of time to do the calculations based on where the calculation was being done, how much data was being brought back. But again, here we had now BWA, another kind of copy of the data. So again, potentially increasing the complexity of my environment as I had copies of information around the system. Now, around that same time, another thing that was happening was that organizations were looking at being able to have better tools in the hands of their end users. So what SAP did is they looked to acquire a technology called business objects. Business objects became the foundation for SAP's go-forward analytics strategy. And so what SAP did was they said, you know, there's a great set of tools within the business objects platform, so we want to be able to allow organizations to leverage those. Because SAP Business Objects had crystal reports, which allowed organizations to create very highly formatted financial reports, regulatory reports, or reports that needed to be bursted out to users on a daily or weekly basis. They also had Web Intelligence, which was an ad hoc reporting tool, so that if an end user had a report that was kind of what they wanted, or they had a BEX query that contained some of the data that they wanted, then they were able to manipulate the data in a report themselves and actually create their own report. So that was ad hoc reporting. We also then have dashboards, or what's also referred to as Design Studio. And that's a solution that allows organizations to create their own web applications. So in fact, this became a premium replacement for a web application designer. So even though web application designer will continue to be supported, there isn't any new development going into that or any of these tools for that matter. And so we're expecting organizations or recommending organizations move to this premium offering that's part of the Business Object Suite called Design Studio. We also then have analysis for Office, which is a premium offering to BEX Analyzer. Allows organizations to slice and dice data within Excel. In fact, the favorite feature, if you don't know anything else about analysis for Office, is the ability to have a pause button. So that as you're slicing and dicing and drilling, instead of having to do a query back to the source system for every time, every slice, every dice, every drill, where you're waiting, instead what you can do is you can hit the pause button, do slice, dice, drill, drill, slice, drill, and then undo the pause button, and boom, be able to see the resulting report come back to you, or output. I've then got analysis for OLAP, which is very, very similar to what I had before within BEX Web, so the ability to analyze and slice and dice information directly over the web. SAP also has a solution called Explorer, which allows organizations to be able to explore through information. I typically describe Explorer this way. If you think about traditional reporting, users had to pre-decide or predetermine how they wanted to lay out a report. in these previous solutions. Like if I was looking at KPIs from a dashboarding perspective, I had to sit down ahead of time around a table and say, what are the KPIs we want to look at? How do we want to track those? And let's design a dashboard that everybody can look at either on a monitor or on their desktops every morning where they can see the results. Explorer is quite the opposite. Explorer basically is about giving me access to the data. And then once I have access to the data, I can explore by drilling or filtering on what aspect of the business I want to explore and find out more information about. So I still have my measures or my key figures, but it's a very easy to use paradigm. In fact, Bill McDermott used this solution when he went on to Squawk Box a few years ago in order to show a real-time view of what was happening within the SAP sales organization. Cisco, the same type of way, they use that to make sure that they can reduce the number of stock outages that they have, as well as understanding their sales pipeline and what products are hot and which ones are not. And then the corollary to this solution as well is something that runs on the desktop called Lumira. And this is our data discovery solution that we have in the marketplace that allows a data analyst to be able to combine information from trusted data sources like BW together with local spreadsheets to be able to get new insights into data, or what we sometimes call dark data, right? Data that isn't necessarily available to everyone. So this is part of our platform, and as well, what's great about it is that all of these solutions are able to be deployed through the mobile device, except for Analysis for Office, which is Excel. But all of these solutions in general can be viewed or looked at through a mobile device. So the great thing about that is you have all these solutions in a single platform or single capability. So that's really nice as a way for organizations to move forward with a premium business intelligence solution. But the problem, as we talk about here with my BW environment, is not only do I have complexity, do I potentially have some speed issues here, but I also have a lack of agility. So if you think about it, I'll ask this question. I already know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So is all the data that you're ever going to need in BW today? Is all the data you're ever going to need already in BW today? No, it's not, is it? There's certain sets of data that exist within your ERP environment that don't exist within BW today. So what do you have to do? What's the process? Well, you have to come in here. You have to have someone that's very, very technical, modify the extractor. They have to test that extractor. You have to get permission to be able to make those changes. And that can be a 4 to 6 week task potentially to do that. So your users say, oh, you know what, don't worry about it. It really doesn't matter. I didn't really need the data that badly anyway. No. They say, I need access to that data. So what do they begin doing? They begin looking at ways of extracting the data. Can anybody here in the room, does anybody know any ways that users might go in and actually pull information out of the system? Like SE16 maybe? Yeah. So SE16 is a way for a transaction that users can use to be able to dump data out of the system. Anybody? Yeah, ABAP functions is another one I heard someone say. Or ABAP programs. We were working with American Water, and they actually had a series of over 50 different ABAP reports or extracts that they were running to pull information out of their ERP environment to put it into SQL Server for better reporting. So there's ABAP functions they can use to pull data out. What else might folks use? Has anybody heard of Squivy? Right, so Squivy is a function as well that you can use to actually create your own joins of tables and information within ERP and then pull that information out. But what's the problem with that, right? The problem with that is that can cost a lot of money, right? It can be very expensive to be able to do that. Plus, it creates more copies of your data, right? Which ultimately increases your complexity again. So we've got more complexity as people extract data, as data goes everywhere. I've got complexity here within my BW environment because of that type of complexity. I've got complexity here potentially because of my BWA and having copies of data there as well. So what did SAP do? So what we did was we said we have to address the complexity within the marketplace. So one of the things that we did was we developed a solution to make it easier to be able to access data. And we created an in-memory platform called HANA, and we allow organizations through our SLT technology, which stands for SAP Landscape Transform. It was a technology that was developed by a company called Zero Downtime that we acquired. And basically what it allows us to do is to move information from our ERP environment into our HANA environment. So basically these same tables that exist within ERP, I'm able to replicate them and have them moved within my HANA environment. Okay? In fact, that also is also true for any Z tables that I have. So I can move those tables over as well. And what's nice is that HANA is an in-memory platform that converges both OLAP processing and OLTP processing, or transactional processing, in an in-memory platform, together with other engines like text analytics, predictive capabilities, etc. And so here it's a combination of both OLAP and OLTP. Okay? And we're, in this case, using it primarily for OLAP because we're moving our data in, and we then can use this for reporting. And so, just like we created pre-built content here within our BW platform, what we did is we said we need to give users an absolute head start here. So we need to look at creating content. So we did that, and we call that content HANA Live. And HANA has its own modeling environment associated with it. So users can go in, they can connect to the tables, they can model the data together. But what's unique about HANA is that unlike BW, where it creates a copy of the data and a copy of the data, it materializes the data, HANA provides non-materialized views of data, or what we sometimes call virtual data models. Virtual data models. And so what we've done is we've provided a pre-built content in a number of different areas. So if I think about my modeling environment and how I might want to model that data, right? We then, after that data has been modeled, which we have done, we then have FI, AR, AP, CO, plant maintenance, for example, supply chain. In fact, we even have our industry solutions that have come out with pre-built views on the industry-only content. So for utilities, my ISU content is there, okay? What's great about this SLT is that instead of me having to replicate the entire ERP system every time a record changes, it only takes the single record that's changed. So if I add a record or delete a record, that change, right, gets replicated from my ERP environment, one transaction at a time, over to my HANA environment in less than 5 seconds. So that's great, because then not only do I have all the data from my ERP system potentially in my HANA platform, but I've also got pre-built content that allows me easier reporting off of that, and all those pre-built views I can use against my business objects platform here. So I can use those same business objects tools I'm using to connect to my queries in my Bex queries, to also connect to the native data right within my HANA environment. So what's so great about that? Well, what's so great about that, or what I like to call YSAP, is that this provides me a bunch of additional advantages. Okay, the first is that I have a copy of the detailed data. So I have a single copy of my BSEG table, for example. That BSEG table gets replicated over here, and I only have a single copy of all that transactional detail that exists within BSEG. So I've got a copy of that data, and because I'm able to use a virtual data model, regardless of how many times I reference BSEG in my modeler, I've only got one copy of the data. I've got a copy of the data, and it's the detailed, lowest level transactional data. It's a copy of what I have in ERP. So there's never going to be any data I don't have, potentially. I've then got the ability of saying, you know, that SLT that I put in there that moves the data over, there's no impact on my transactional system because it's only bringing the data over a transaction at a time. So we've done all kinds of testing here, and we can architect your system for you so that there's absolutely no impact on your operational system. There's also zero latency, right? So in less than 5 seconds, I can run the same report that I would have run over here directly against these virtual models, and I'm going to get the same results, exact same results. In fact, we work with a utility in the Northeast they had a transaction, a settlement transaction that they were using during their month end close called FB50. We actually took the data, we replicated it over to HANA. We then took the ABAP transaction that existed in ERP, instead of it reading the data from here, from the ERP, which actually took 8 hours, we actually ran it and connected it to HANA that existed in the cloud. Right? It was able to connect to a HANA within our HANA Enterprise Cloud environment, and it was able to get the results back in less than 4 seconds. So again, it depends on the individual scenario, but it's very dramatic, the kind of impact that you can do by having a copy of that data in the HANA platform. So zero latency. I can also connect to all of my same business objects tools. So my business objects, BI suite, all these tools as well, I can use to connect to my HANA content. Because we have HANA Live or pre-built content, that's there as well. I have pre-built content. And that content is also extensible, right? Which means I can simply take my standard SAP content, I can then create extensions on top of that, and through our services, we can show you exactly how to do that, so that as upgrades take place, there aren't going to be any changes to that content as you go forward, or the impact of those changes would be minimal. In fact, as we said, what's important here is that as I have those models, if I have a Z table over here, for example, and that same Z table exists within SAP, I can then extend that content and connect that Z table to it. And then finally, the great thing about it is that because it's an in-memory solution, it's extremely fast from a performance perspective, but most important, it's also agile because of the fact that I'm using a virtual data modeler. So when we talked to Molson Coors, one of the things that they said prior to implementing HANA in this way, it took them anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks to be able to get data from ERP into their BW environment. Now they're able to do it in less than 20 minutes. So now they're able to make that data available for reporting through the HANA platform in less than 20 minutes. And then the final thing about this is that this is a safe way to move forward because it's completely non-disruptive from the perspective of moving the environment over here. Now, the other thing to be aware of is that as I build my content on top of my HANA system, and because this is a copy of my tables that exist within my ERP system, one thing to remember is that at some point in the future, I may decide I want to run my ERP system directly on HANA, because HANA provides capabilities for both OLAP and OLTP, or transactional processing. So I can potentially take that same HANA environment, right, and I can take that and I can move that underneath my ERP system, and I can actually get rid of, right, my need for a relational database here. So think about it, all the reports, all the content that I build off of these pre-built models in this HANA environment, when I ultimately at some point in the future move that under my ERP system, all of that stays intact. I'm going to be able to continue to get value out of that. So that's huge. And I'll talk about some advantages of running HANA in ERP in just a minute. But I want to continue on here because there's actually even more value that I can get out of this safe, what we sometimes refer to as a sidecar approach to HANA, where I'm replicating data over to HANA. So some of the additional advantages that I have with that are the fact that not only am I able to access information that's getting replicated over from ERP, but I also have this capability we have called Smart Data Access, which basically says I may have some relational data sources out in my environment already, like Oracle, SQL Server, Teradata, right, from Microsoft, for example, and I might want to connect HANA to those different systems. So if I have a table, like for example here in Teradata, and I want to use Smart Data Access, this actually becomes a virtual table in HANA, which basically means we're not literally taking all the data from Teradata and copying it in here as we are from here. This is actually a copy of the data in ERP. But actually what we're able to do is we're referencing it virtually, right? So I'm referencing that as a virtual table. So now if you think about my data models, right, I can extend these pre-built data models to connect to content outside of my SAP environment. In other cases, I may decide that I want to actually connect to I want to take information from external data sources and load it directly into HANA. I can do that as well. So if I have a relational data source here, or if I have really any other type of data source, it could even be an Excel spreadsheet or a CSV file, okay? I can use the data services capabilities that exist within HANA to pull that information directly into my HANA platform. So now, if I have a view of data here within my data services platform, this would actually be materialized here as a table. And then I can use it within my HANA Live platform to, again, potentially extend my data model. Okay? So now HANA can really begin to become kind of the centralized hub for all of your reporting and data access, right? From the perspective of some of these of my ERP system and other types of external data sources, okay? But at the same time, I still have a large investment in BW, and that's not going away. So let me get to that in just one second. So as if this weren't good enough, if this weren't great, things continue to get even better. If I look at what I have here within the environment, SAP also delivers through BW something called a composite data provider. Okay? So a composite data provider is something that exists within BW. So if I choose at some point in the future to run BW on HANA, I'll talk about why you might want to do that in just a minute. Then what you have is you have the ability to leverage something called a composite data provider, where I can take my data model that I've modeled within BW, okay? And then I've got my data model that I modeled within my HANA environment, okay? And now what I can do is through that composite data provider, I can join these models together. And that means if there's also any virtual data, for example, that I've modeled within my HANA environment, that's there. I can connect that there as well. If there's a Z table in here, right, I can combine that as well. If there's any data that I loaded in, right, I can connect all of that as well. So the beauty of this composite data provider means that I can leverage all of my roles, my security, my hierarchies, my currency, everything that I manage from within the enterprise data warehousing perspective within BW. I can leverage all those existing data models, and I can create these composite data providers that allow me to combine my agile environment down here that's running my native HANA environment that's pulling data in, or that has copies of my ERP data, and I can combine that with my BW views. So now it's huge as far as what I have access to within a BW environment. So let's talk about, from a BW perspective, why SAP, right? So let's talk about this. Why SAP? Why HANA? Okay? So if you think about it, for the first thing is that my query performance is going to be amazing. Okay, so we're seeing anywhere from 5 to 50x or even higher performance gains by putting HANA within my BW environment. Okay, and by doing that, what it allows me to do is I get rid of my traditional relational database that existed here before. I don't have to worry about tracking database statistics and all of the admin associated with running that platform. It allows me as well to get rid of my BWA environment, because why did we have BWA? We had it because the performance of my environment wasn't good enough, and so I needed to have a certain number of queries I needed to accelerate. So I can remove BWA, which allows me to remove some of the additional complexities that I had before. Okay? So that means I'm basically simplifying my environment, because I'm going to remove BWA. But not only can I simplify my environment by removing BWA, what I can begin to do is I can begin to reduce some of this complexity. So for example, remember, what happened to this big cube here? The performance was poor, so I had to divide it up into smaller chunks. Well, now that's not going to be an issue, because the performance is now going to be done here within HANA. So now I can begin to take certain copies of data that might exist and I can begin to remove them. I don't need these smaller copies of cubes for performance reasons because this larger cube is going to be good enough, right? Because I don't have the performance issues I had before. I don't have to remodel data, for example, just for performance reasons or just to reduce the complexity so that my users are able to have a better experience when they're using BEX. So by being able to reduce some of these layers, it allows us, again, to get rid of the complexity, and it allows us to increase our agility, right, or get rid of this decrease in agility. In fact, the CFO was not very happy as a result of all this complexity that they were seeing within the environment. So once I'm able to take HANA and put that within my BW environment, now really what I can do is I can turn that frown back into a smile. As we see that complexity reducing, I can reduce the size of the overall footprint. In fact, if you look at the case study that we did with Southern California Edison, right, with Southern California Edison, they basically were able to go from a 20 terabyte data BW environment footprint down to 320 megabytes because they were keeping a lot of additional logs, because they were having some challenges during the activation process. They had lots of extra info cubes that they were able to get rid of. In fact, what they found was, in many cases, they were able to just do the reporting directly off of the DSO. So they created their data models off the DSO together with connecting that to master data, and that was really all they needed. They didn't have to create additional info cubes on top of that. So simplifying the landscape's huge, performance is huge. The activation process is reduced by 80%, right? So if you look at the extraction process, when you extracted information into BW and then you would activate the DSO, what would happen? Depending on how much new data there was or how much data changed, that activation process could take a very long time. In fact, for a lot of our utility customers where they were doing meter reads and they were bringing in millions of transactions for their customers, it could run up to 8 hours for that entire activation process to finish. In fact, they were getting worried as it had gone from 4 hours to 6 hours to 8 hours, and they were trying to figure out what they were going to do. So by putting HANA under your BW environment, right, now your activation process is going to be reduced significantly because the processing of that activation gets pushed down into HANA. In fact, if you remember before, what was one of the challenges of BWA? I still had this OLAP processor. Well, now what we've been able to do within HANA is we've been able to take nearly all of that OLAP processing and push that down into the HANA in-memory database. So that processing happens down within HANA and not at the application server layer here within BW. So that's huge. So that also increases my performance and allows me to reduce my complexity. So what else do we have? Well, remember before how we had complexity here. People were creating copies of the data. Well, now what I can do is, again, I can make these users happy because now they no longer have to pull information out of the environment as spreadsheets, right? What I can do is I can say, hey, if you want access to data, boom, it's already over here in your HANA sidecar type of environment, okay? And then finally, at some point, again, all organizations are going to want to move to running ERP on HANA, or what SAP is now deemed or is now calling S/4HANA, right? And that is running their ERP system directly on a HANA platform because the HANA platform is so fast, because it's so agile. What we're now able to do is, for example, many of the transactions that ran in the past, because we ran on so many different types of databases, we had to use the least common denominator of functionality across those databases. So we did nearly all the database processing in the application tier of ERP. Now what we're doing is we're doing all of that processing down in the HANA layer itself. So now that's why we're actually seeing many processes that used to run for hours within the ERP environment are now able to run in seconds within an S/4HANA or Suite on HANA environment, because we pushed that processing down into the HANA platform. So these users are happy. My CFO is still happy. My IT organization is happy because of what have we done? We've been able to use the innovative capabilities of HANA to be able to reduce the complexity that users' experience within their SAP environment. So hopefully what you've done through this last bit of time we've had together has been able to see how SAP is able to use HANA as a core aspect of their roadmap to deliver innovation and to deliver simplicity to organizations. Thank you very much.